Alright, so for today, with the video, I'm going to explain all the membranes, pressures, mechanisms that make negative pressure ventilation possible. I'll describe what pneumothorax is and how it occurs. I'll say what surfactant is, and then talk about how lactic surfactant will impair ventilation. I'll also explain surface tension and the role of Laplace's law. I'll also explain the alveolar gas equation and how it can be used clinically. Oh, I need to sneeze. I'm so congested. Discuss how CO2 and O2 are transported in the blood. And then I'll include a description of the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve and the factors that influence the affinity for hemoglobin for oxygen, how these factors affect oxygen's hemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay, so what we're going to draw out is right here, we got trachea, and it's going to branch out. There's another thing over here. No, I don't want that picture. Yeah, so it's over this way. Yeah. So we got outside lung. Here we got inside. I'm going to make a real big alveolus, because why not? Okay, so, I have the visceral pleura. We made that purple, and it covers the lung directly. Purple. I'm going to say, I know it doesn't look like it, but it's right on top of the lung. And then we have the parietal pleura, which aligns the inner surface of the thoracic cavity, diaphragm, and so we're going to make that orange. So I drew it like they have big space. Really, these suckers are on top of each other. But in between those, we have what's called the interstitial space, or the pleural cavity. And it's the space between the visceral and parietal pleura. And it's filled with a little bit of liquid. I think they call it pleural fluid. It's mainly water. I don't know how much. But it allows for smooth movement. It creates surface tension to hold the lungs against the chest wall. So we're going to do this. There's some fluid in between. That fluid is important because it helps for us to have negative pressure from the water in there. So, moving forward, Oh, jeez. So, we got different pressures involved. Obviously, our lungs lead to outside, and we have outside atmospheric pressure. We call that PATM, and that's approximately 760 millimeters of mercury if we're at sea level. I can also call that 0, but I'm going to stick with 760 because that's what makes sense to me, So that's what we're going to do. So, moving on. Come on, brain. Think of things. Come on, brain. Be so smart. I also have Jeez. Oh, yeah. Let's draw that right here. PATM, because it's easy to draw out. It's going to be about 760 millimeters of mercury. We have the intratural pressure. Which will be negative. I think Brother Hunt, Brother Shaw, they called it something different. What was that they called it? Yeah. So, jeez. All right, we're good. So, yeah. And we also have, so it's going to be negative. pressure, and that's important because due to the opposing force, the chest will expand outward and the lungs recoil inward. So you're exhaling, it's going to do that because these fibers in here have elastin in them, so they'll recoil back kind of like a rubber band. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have, I need a pen, P, alveolar. So our P alveolar pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. That air will go in because air will it travels from high pressures to low pressures, and that's inhalation. And then during expiration, it's the opposite. So instead, if our P alveolar is greater than our PATM, then air leaves lungs, air in lungs. Oh, jeez. Okay, so we'll do the mechanisms. Not four. Jeez. Come on, man. Come on, man. Negative pressure. I feel a sneeze coming in. So during inspiration, the diaphragm, which the diaphragm is just here underneath the lungs, they'll contract, they'll flatten out, which will then increase their thoracic volume. Our external intercostal muscles. So we're going to draw it out. Our lips are right here. So these little muscles in between, and those are intercostal muscles. The external ones, not the ones that are on top of the, excuse me. The, visceral pleura, ones that are outside of that, the external ones, they will actually contract to expand the rib cage. So, and then also that internal pressure from the water, the pH2O. What that's going to do is that allows for these to move as a unit as they move out, so that the lung doesn't collapse. So the lung doesn't collapse when we pump up air, because this will get bigger and it'll expand like a balloon. So we want the lung to stay where it's at, so it'll move out like that. And they'll also increase the the increase in the thoracic volume will decrease, which will cause our pressure in our alveolus or alveoli, these suckers, to drop below atmospheric pressure, and then we'll pull air in. During expiration, our diaphragm, so the muscle right here, it's going to relax and it'll reduce our thoracic volume, and then our pressure will return to that -5 from the water, and then our P alveolar will increase because of that, and it'll push our air out the trachea. Air actually can't move between these different things. So if we're going to draw a graphs, because that's what we do in the physiology. Sorry, let's draw this out. Diaphragm. Relax. Oh no, diaphragm will contract. No. Yeah, diaphragm contract. Flattens. Expand rib cage. just gonna do external EX. Intercostal muscles contract, rib cage gets bigger, and then we get increase in our P H2O, or thoracic, or sorry, no, our thoracic volume will increase. So, jeez, I gotta sneeze so bad. So volume will increase, and then so the pressure will decrease, and what we can call that is Laplace's law. Come on, please. I need to sneeze. That's Boyle's law. So Boyle's law. Hold on 1 second, I need to blow my nose. Okay, sorry about that. I feel much better. So, Boyle's law tells us that we have an inverse relationship between pressure and volume. So, if pressure increases, volume will decrease. But if volume increases, then pressure will decrease. We have another law. We'll talk about that later. Actually, no, this law is important. So we have Laplace's law. Actually, let's finish right now. The expiration. So yeah, with expiration, it's just the opposite. So our diaphragm. That's how you spell diaphragm. And those intercostals relax. Because it'll relax, it'll reduce our thoracic volume. Wow, my spelling is horrendous. And that decrease in our thoracic volume will mean that we have an increase in the pressure. That's why we were talking about Boyle's law. So that increase in pressure, if there's higher pressure inside our alveolus than in the atmosphere, then air will leave. Okay, so moving on. We're going to do pneumothorax. So pneumothorax is the presence of air in the pleural space leading to the collapse of the lung. So what we're going to be doing is we're putting air into it, which will, what's it called? So yeah, the mechanism is a breach in the visceral parietal pleura. It allows air into the pleural space, and then that loss of the negative intrapleural pressure will cause the lung to collapse due to the unopposed elastic recoil. So if we increase air into there, then the water no longer has that same, our pH2O, which is what we called it earlier. It won't have an effect with the pneumothorax, so the lung will collapse. There's different flavors of how we can get this. There's a spontaneous pneumothorax, which occurs without trauma. An example would be a ruptured bleb in what's it called? Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Traumatic pneumothorax would be some kind of injury, most commonly a stab wound. And then there's also this thing called never mind, I don't think it's important. Okay, cool. So we have two different types of pneumocytes in our lungs, and we got type 1 and type 2. Type 2 can do something really cool. What type 2 can do is they can dump surfactant. And surfactant is its production is stimulated by cortisol. So when babies get to a certain point and the moms are like, oh, it's so cute, my baby's kicking, it's really like if you take your little, at least Brother Shaw explained it, he was saying, it's like he talked about a story about his little brother being put in a sleeping bag and then a closed sleeping bag and then sat on top of it. So he was struggling for air. Similar thing for the babinos. Surfactants used because we have that high, so when you feel like you have the struggle of the ability to breathe, you're going to release cortisol because you're stressed out, and that release of cortisol will lead to a release of surfactant. Surfactant, it's a lipoprotein complex, meaning it's 90% lipids, 10% proteins, and is secreted by these type 2 alveolar cells. It's got a polar head, it's got some tails. Anyways, so its function is to reduce surface tension alveoli, which will prevent alveolar collapse. And it also increases lung compliance and reduces work of breathing. So surfactant will decrease elastance, which elastance is kind of like inertia. It's the resistance that the lung actually has to change in movement, resistance to stretch. That's a way to say that. Resistance to stretch. So elastance is going to be equal to a change in P over a change in V. While compliance is going to be equal to a change in V over a change in P. So we're just going to draw a pressure loop curve because I think it's important. So we'll call that normal. On our x-axis, we'll call it pressure. On our y-axis, we'll call it volume. Not volume, volume. Okay. So if we shift to the left, as you can see, we would have low elastance, but high compliance. So left would be an obstructive pulmonary disease. Then we go right, will be restrictive. This isn't exact. This is very, very rough estimations. But here we have, let's use arrows. High E, low C, low E, high C. So obstructive, you have no problem getting air in, but you have a really difficult time getting air out with exhalation. With restrictive, it's the opposite. You have a hard time getting air in, but you have no problem getting air out. And that's because of restrictive, you have high elasticity. If you have high resistance to strain, it's like trying to blow up a balloon in the first couple of seconds. It's real hard, and then you hit a point where you overcome the elastance, and then it becomes real easy, and then it gets hard again right before you're about to pop the balloon. But we don't do that with our lungs because we like our lungs not being popped like balloons. So an example of an obstructive COPD, that's really, I think, textbook of it. Another one's emphysema, which you can get from smoking, so don't do drugs, kids. And then you also have asthma is also an obstructive pulmonary disease. And then, for instance, with a right shift, with a restrictive, an example could be like a premature baby because they don't produce surfactant. They haven't had that time of going through that stage where they have the cortisol dump that stimulates them to produce surfactant. So what a doctor will do if they're quick on their toesies, they'll give the baby a cortisol injection so they start producing surfactant so that they can breathe more easily. Otherwise, they do the really labored breaths as they're struggling to get air in, and they have no problem getting air out. So, anyways, moving on. We'll talk about surface tension and Laplace's law. So, Laplace's law is pressure is equal to 2T over R. Well, pressure is, the pressure is going to be what's required to keep the alveolus open. T is our surface tension, and then R is the radius of the alveolus. If we didn't have a surfactant, then small alveoli would collapse due to higher pressure needed to keep them open. So there's all that stuff. One more thing about the neonatal thing. What's it called? Anyways, premature baby not being able to breathe. Another important thing to be able to know about it is there's also poor gas exchange because you're not really getting an effective breath because you have some kind of pulmonary disease. So, yeah, makes sense. Some more graphs. So, another important thing with that's how do you spell Laplace? Laplace. Close enough for me. Specifically with alveoli. So yeah, if R gets too small, then the pressure is too great, and then collapsation. We also have what we call the alveolar gas equation. And what that gas equation is P big A O2 is going to be equal to, my nose. FiO2 times PATM minus PH2O, in parentheses, minus PoCO2 all over R. Breaking this all down. P big A O2 is our alveolar oxygen partial pressure. Our FiO2 is the inspired oxygen. So yeah, it's just a factor that we can be able to. This is typically a value that we use to be able to supplement people when they have different pulmonary diseases and they need oxygen. We usually keep it at 0.21%. When you're going to give them oxygen, you're obviously going to change that number so you can be able to get their PaO2 where it needs to be, because we want our alveolar oxygen partial pressure to be equal to our P little a O2, which is the pressure of oxygen inside of the blood. So if we draw it out, we got alveolus, and we got our sangre. So let's say sangre, we got CO2 in there, we got all in. That will be able to enter into our alveolus because we're at a higher pressure within the veins than we are in the alveolus, at least when it comes to CO2. I also have, this is our PA big O2, and this is little PaO2. These should be the same. It should be 100 plus or minus about 4. Anyways. So breaking this down a little bit more, this value right here is 760. It's the pressure of sea level. This is about 50. This is typically 40, and then R is unique. R is equal to our CO2 produced over our oxygen used. And that value can change. Typically use the value 0.85, but it can go anywhere from 0.8 to 1. The reason why I use 0.85 is because unless you're on some crazy diet, not crazy, if you're on some kind of diet, your R value can be a little bit different. You're mainly eating, no, I don't want the laser pointer. If you're mainly eating carbs, then your R is going to be a lot closer to 1. But say you're like on keto and you're eating only fats, then it's going to be closer to 0.7. Or if you're diabetic and you just can't, type 1 diabetic and you don't have insulin, or it's type 2, your insulin doesn't work as well. Anyways, if you're diabetic, yours is going to be closer to 0.7 because you're not really able to get transition those carbs to energy. So it goes down lower because unlike carbs, it's a 1-to-1 ratio just because of how it works out. We're using 6 oxygens to produce 6 carbon dioxides with the sugar equation, aerobic cellular respiration equation. But with fats, we actually use more oxygen to be able to burn them than we produce them, so that's why their value is 0.7. Next, I'm just going to draw this little loop right here. Also, this equation up here, our alveolar gas equation, it's used to calculate a gradient. It's also able to identify part of the causes of hypoxia. And then later, it can also help us to be able to figure out like a VQ mismatch, which I'll talk about later, like a diffusion defect or a shunt. So this little curve right here, this is alveolus right there. Our P big A O2 should be about 100 millimeters of mercury. And then here we have our arterial. Here we're going to have PaO2 about 100, with our PaCO2 should be about 40, as we were showing up there on the other side. Well, it goes through into the body. Body's just a box, we're just giant sacks of water. So I'm going to draw like that because I'm not very good at drawing people. Then we got PaO2, it's about 40, and we'll talk about why that goes down so much. And then we also got the PaCO2 with the venous side is approximately 44. And the differences of why this is because CO2 is more dissolvable in H2O. I'll show you why. H2O is polar. We look at CO2. This is CO2, slightly polar. These both have a little bit of a negative charge. Makes this they both have partial negative charges. Carbon becomes partially positive. CO2 is slightly polar compared to O2, like that, completely non-polar. So non-polar things don't usually like to mix with polar things in solution. So we see that CO2 is more soluble in water than O2 is. And we have a guy to thank this for. His came with this law, and it's called Henry's law, which states that super basically some gases are more soluble than others. So yeah, that explains this. Any questions? Just kidding. There's no questions. I'm leading it. Oh, jeez. I need to sneeze. So yeah. So we're going to talk about transport CO2. And O2 in the blood. So, oxygen transport. We're going to draw out this sucker. So we got a blood vessel, right? And then inside of here, I'm going to attempt to draw a jelly donut red blood cell. It is not really a jelly donut. Inside the jelly donut, it has hemoglobin. And hemoglobin has 4 different subunits. We're going to draw them out. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got alpha, beta, alpha. Beta, alpha. And inside each of these, we have a heme. And these hemes, they're super neato. They have 2 different states for our hemoglobin. One of those states, so we have a heme. The heme is got iron on the center, and that iron's held together by 2 different histidine groups and stabilized by other amino acids within the compound. But this histidine can be in 2 different states. That's iron in the middle. We have it in the R state where it can bind. R for relaxed. R state. And we got the T state. Oh, jeez. Too many laser pointers. I don't need laser pointer. I don't even know how you got selected. Anyways, in the T state, I'm going to explain this later. I'm just going to draw stuff out because I want to. So T state, it has a lower affinity for oxygen. R state, it has a higher affinity for oxygen. In the T state, there's going to be different things that are going to change the positioning of the iron in there that will cause the iron to have a lower affinity for the oxygen. So what we find is that 98% of oxygen within our bodies is bound to hemoglobin. And then going forward, I'm just going to explain as HB. So I don't want to draw hemoglobin every single time. That's annoying. 2% O2 plasma blood. Then with our carbon dioxide, it's a little more unique. 70% is converted to bicarb via carbonic anhydrase. Super important enzyme. We love it. 20%, about 23% is what we'll call it. Is bound to hemoglobin. And then about 7% is dissolved in the blood. So, yeah, fun stuff. So, to be able to figure out if we're more T state, more R state, we have these little graphs. Over here we have our pressure. It's going to be P atmospheric 1 over, I keeps going back to the laser pointer, I don't get it, over PA little AO2. And this is our hemoglobin saturation percentage. So first we'll draw normal. For around here, that's going to look like that. We'll go here about 100%. Here we'll label that 90. A little bit higher. 90, 70, 40. So, interesting thing, once hemoglobin, once its oxygen gets stripped off, going from T state, R state, if you're below 70%, you'll use a little alligator clip. I think it's called pulse oximeter. Anyways, so if you're using one of those suckers, that's what it's finding out is your percentage of hemoglobin saturation with that little red light in your finger. I think they usually use your earlobe because it is better, or one of your big toes. I don't know. Depends on the situation, I guess. Everybody's different. And we don't want those to be we just don't want them to be kind of messed up. So, for instance, you can have different, the left or right shift. I'll try out a left shift first. Left shift means you're going to be more T state than R state. Or sorry. Yeah, it'll be more T state. So an example would be increasing temp, increasing PCO2, decreasing our pH, and then increasing this molecule called 2,3-BPG. That is what will in left shift is inhibiting O2 unloading. So I have everything backwards. That is so awkward. Not really. So increasing pH, decreasing PPG, decreasing POC2, and decreasing temperature. So left shift, we'll have a right shift here in blue. Good, remember right shift is cadet, or cadet face right. So C is going to be increasing our CO2. A is going to be an increase in our acids. D is going to be an increase in 2,3-BPG. And then E is exercise. Exercise will produce more lactate, so it makes more acid, more lactic acid. You'll be increasing your CO2 as well because your cells are going to be working harder, and you'll also be increasing 2,3-BPG, which can be converted on your red blood cells via a fun little pathway. And also temperature, you'll get warmer, so you'll increase the temperature. So a left shift, you're going to be increasing affinity, which it will inhibit O2 loading. Inhibit O2 loading is your more R state. Not T. Jeez Louise. So left is you're inhibiting O2 unloading. So yeah, more. I think I had that right. More T state. Or wait. Inhibits O2 loading. So released R state, relaxed R state. So R state, oxygen can bind onto it. So yeah, left is your more R, right. So yeah, the right shift will have an enhanced O2 delivery to tissues during exercise, fever, or acidosis. Left will have more retention of O2, and that's seen in alkalosis or hypothermia because your temperature's decreasing, so you're cold. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. No, I don't think I did. Neato. Just double check. Oh, I did miss something. So what I said we were going to talk about earlier is 0.8 to 1 are these VQ intervals. And if our so V over Q, V is, So if you have high V over Q, Q is it's like our perfusion of the lungs. V is our alveolar ventilation. So if we have a high V over Q, we're breathing more into than normally, and that's most likely because Q is low, like a pulmonary embolism. So if Q is low, then we're not able to perfuse blood as easily. Then we'll be breathing more. So pulmonary embolism or some kind of obstruction, it just doesn't let the blood flow go through the alveolus as easily, which will cause for that kind of thing. What it really does is we're increasing the dead space because you're not able to do gas exchanges there. So your normal dead space is from right before your alveolus all the way up the bronchioles up until the trachea. That dead space, you're not able to have gas exchange. That's why we call it dead space. Which increases dead space, not good. As we can see, you're decreasing your Q, so your VQ ratio will be much higher than usual. A low VQ is like a shunt. So with the shunt, I'm gonna sneeze again. No, I'm good. It's fine. It's all fine. Okay, so with this VQ ratio, one more time. Sorry, I also missed on here. So if we're shifting left, we'll be going alkalosis. It can make hypoxia worse, but if we're under acidosis, we can make the hypoxia better. With hot, temperature-wise, we'll shift to the right, which will cause oxygen to fall more easily. Cold, it stays on. And then also the Bohr effect, it's with pH. Also give us a right shift. So yeah, this VQ thing we're going to do. So with the shunt, you're not able to get fresh air in. So yeah, as we're not able to get as much fresh air in to the areas because the blood is being diverted through this hole in the heart. Our Q will stay the same because the perfusion is the same, the blood's moving the same way. But what in the world? I don't know how that got selected. So our ventilation will decrease, Q will stay the same. And this is during shunt. So yeah, our Q will stay the same because we're still perfusing as normally. A shunt is when blood will completely skip the lungs and it'll go from the right atria or right ventricle to the left ventricle. So it's not going to become oxygenated blood. So alveolar ventilation is going to decrease because it's being diverted. And that will lead to a low VQ. Low VQ ratio. So that's all I got.